You know something people love talking about? Superheroes. I mean, just look around. Like every couple months, there's like a new superhero movie coming out, and they're huge. They make billions and billions of dollars. But you know something that a lot of people actually don't like talking about so much? Religion. Now, that can be a bit of a touchy subject. Sometimes it's controversial or a point of contention for a lot of people. Luckily, I'm someone who loves to talk about both, and I'm here to talk to you today about how the superhero genre and religious discussion actually can go hand in hand. Now, when we consider religion, we think of religious institutions and belief systems that have been driving factors for much of humanity throughout our history. And superheroes, on the other hand, are more fun and exciting. Boom, explosions. So, how can we even begin to fit them together? Let's start by considering the birthplace of superheroes: comic books. Comics and graphic novels are becoming more prominent and appreciated in the realm of academia. And like other forms of art and literature, they offer deeper commentary on society beyond just the narrative itself. Into these stories, we see different ideas of identity and character struggle, uh, studies on class, race, and among these discussions, yes, the topic of religion. For my discussion today, I want to talk about the X-Men. The X-Men is a group of superheroes from Marvel Comics, and the X-Men are often known for being a parallel to the civil rights movement or a metaphor for racial discussions, with the X-Men as mutants representing the underclass or the racial minority or the marginalized people group within their society. And although the X-Men comics are often discussed for their contribution to the conversations on race, the comic books also have a whole lot to say about religion as well. The diverse cast of characters in the X-Men comics and films hail from different ethnicities, nationalities, and religions. And while many religions are present throughout the X-Men mythos, Judaism and Christianity are pretty consistently present among some of the story's main characters. The X-Men comics and films use characters like Magneto, William Stryker, and Nightcrawler to discuss religious dichotomies in Judaism and Christianity and how these dichotomies have had adverse effects on society. Much of the conversation surrounding the topic of religion in X-Men centers around the character of Magneto. As a longtime archenemy of the X-Men, Magneto is pretty consistently present in X-Men media, and scholars note that character's Jewish background as being a very key factor in understanding Magneto's characterization. Magneto's ethno-religious heritage is directly tied to his origin story. The character is a Holocaust survivor, which is a motivating factor for his actions and beliefs as a character. Some scholars note that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the creators of X-Men, were Jewish Americans, and that Bryan Singer, the director of some of the X-Men films, was also Jewish. And while this is definitely true, and it's quite possible that they wrote their Jewish experience into the stories, it's also important to note that a lot of the comics and stories in the X-Men universe, like most comics, are products of evolving authorship over time, and Magneto as a character is no exception. Much of his character development and history and origin have changed and evolved through time, depending on who's writing the story. Magneto first appeared in 1963, but the character's Jewish origin and Holocaust background story wasn't included until the 1980s under writer Chris Claremont, who also comes from a Jewish background. Now, you may be wondering what's the big deal with all of this, and what's the problem with his origin being added so late? Well, the problem is that Magneto, as a character, believes that mutants are genetically superior to humans, and in order to carry this belief out, he seeks to eradicate the human race with mutants ruling over them. And this idea of genetic superiority is very, very, very opposite to the idea of someone who would have suffered at the hands of Nazis who believe the exact same thing about themselves. So as we can see, Claremont's inclusion of Magneto's Jewish background complicates him as a character because, as someone who is Jewish and who even himself suffered at the hands of Nazi ideology, his ideas and practice are very, well, Nazi-like. Ideological paradoxes like the one in Magneto exist in some of Claremont's other X-Men stories. In the graphic novel X-Men God Loves, Man Kills, Claremont explores religious dichotomies and their societal ramifications within Christianity through the characters of William Stryker and Nightcrawler. X-Men God Loves, Man Kills is a popular 1982 graphic novel that pits the mutant heroes against a group of religious extremists known as the Purifiers. The Purifiers are led by a man named Reverend William Stryker, and he's an evangelical minister that believes that he's chosen by God to save humanity from the mutant race. This belief emerged one day when Stryker was on a trip to visit his family with his pregnant wife. They got in a car wreck, and his wife ended up going into labor. Upon delivering the baby, Stryker realized that due to the baby's appearance, he was a mutant, and Stryker took matters into his own hands and killed his wife and his baby. It's quite morbid, but then he learned about Professor X and later realized, or at least according to his mind, that humans were made in God's image, and that mutants were made in the devil's image, and that in order to save mankind, he must totally eradicate the mutant race. Stryker's extremism, which drives him to believe that he should eradicate an entire race, is pretty bad for someone who has a Christian faith. Christianity's teachings are a religious ideology built around loving one's neighbors, and in that particular religion, the idea of killing others is condemned. So, for Stryker's movement to kill those that he hates would be completely opposite of what Christianity teaches, similar to Magneto's opposite ideology. However, the Christian community is often critiqued for being bigoted or judgmental or hypocritical, and Claremont, I believe, wrote Stryker as a character meant to reflect that. Now, on the other hand, you have the character of Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler is a devout Catholic. The issue with his Catholicism is that Nightcrawler is a furry, blue, pointy-eared, yellow-eyed, creepy, well, demonic-looking character. And despite his outward appearance that's frightening and maybe even evil looking, Nightcrawler is typically depicted as a very kind, fun-loving, and deeply, deeply religious character. He's very strong in his faith, and that's expressed throughout the comics. Did I mention Nightcrawler even has sharp teeth and a tail? Despite religion being a pretty huge theme in X-Men God Loves, Man Kills, Nightcrawler actually, interestingly enough, doesn't say much about his faith in that particular comic book story. But there is a very, very interesting scene in which the characters at the climax of the story, the X-Men and Stryker, come face to face with one another. At this moment, Stryker sees Nightcrawler and says, "Human? You dare call that thing?" In that moment, we come to see this idea of religious dichotomy within Christianity on full display. We see the suit and tie wearing, clean-cut white American preacher William Stryker being very hateful and villainous and evil, as opposed to this frightfully demonic figure being noble and kind-hearted and good. The convergence of those two characters in that space at the height of the story indicates something very, very interesting. That faith can be misdirected. Now, by this point, you may be wondering, well, this is all very interesting, but why does it matter? What does this have to do with us? Well, I think that if we continue to look at Magneto and Stryker's example, we'll understand that a bit more. We see two men here who are strong in faith and very, very driven by what they believe, and they take action based on that belief. However, they act out of a type of fear. Magneto, having witnessed genocide, ends up becoming one who wants to commit genocide. And Stryker is not so different. He fears an impending genocide. He sees mutants as a thing to be feared, as a threat to humanity, and because of that, he seeks to eradicate mutant kind. I think the idea we see here with this dichotomy is that the age-old idea of, in fighting something, you must be careful not to become the thing itself. These people, Stryker and Magneto, their mindsets cause them to be rooted in a desire to protect themselves and their respective people groups from outside danger. Yet, in the process of carrying out their beliefs, they themselves become the very outside dangers for others they wish to avoid. Stryker and Magneto as villains illustrate the idea that striving for the betterment of a people group by eliminating the other is highly problematic, and that's demonstrated in the comics. But another idea demonstrated in the comics is that characters like Magneto are marked by who they are on the inside rather than the outside. And the point that the X-Men writers have been trying to make is that we should look at characters or people in the same way, knowing them for the inside value they have rather than just our assumptions on them. Hatred rooted in race, religion, or any other social factor has the potential to disassemble the framework of a society. But knowing others without the barrier of hatred or prejudice preserves it.